As I'm sure you know, George R.R. Martin is a history nerd.
A lot of A Song of Ice and Fire is heavily influenced by the War of the Roses, and many of the cultures in the world of Planetos are based on the various empires of our history. There are an unbelievable amount of parallels between the world George has crafted and our own.
I mean, just look at his world map. Westeros is basically the UK and Essos is Eurasia. But when I first experienced Westeros, unfortunately in the form of the TV show, I got to the episode Blackwater. I couldn't help but notice a striking amount of similarities between it and a certain historical battle, the largest naval battle in history, in fact. See, when I was a kid, I was a huge fan of the video game series Dynasty Warriors, and that of course is based off of Romance of the Three Kingdoms. And Romance of the Three Kingdoms, other than being shoe propaganda, is one of the greatest pieces of literature ever created.
Written by Luo Guangzhong in the 14th century, the book details the nearly 100-year-long civil war in 200s China that split the country into, you guessed it, three kingdoms. And one of the most important and defining moments of that period was the Battle of Red Cliffs, otherwise known as the Battle of Shirbi. Aside from the obvious fact that both battles involved defenders prevailing against a much larger attacking force, due in large part to a fire attack completely destroying their opponent's fleet, there are many more subtle similarities.
So we wanted to know, did Gurm base Blackwater off of Red Cliffs? For a brief history lesson that is without a doubt completely inaccurate, since I'm discussing Romance of the Three Kingdoms depiction, and I don't believe Zhuge Liang really used a magical prayer to control the winds. In the year 208 AD, the Battle of Red Cliffs was fought between Cao Cao and the combined forces of Liu Bei and Sun Quan. By this point, Cao Cao has established himself as the most powerful man in China. He had just a few years prior defeated who was previously the most powerful man, Yuan Shao, a rival warlord who at one point was a childhood friend of Cao Cao's. Despite being massively outnumbered, Cao Cao managed to defeat him at Guandu in large part due to a surprise night raid that completely destroyed Yuan Shao's supplies, swiftly ending the battle. In the process, many of his men defected to Cao Cao.
Cao Cao wanted to claim the province of Jing, which was held by Liu Biao. Luckily for Cao Cao, Liu Biao would soon die, and Jing was promptly surrendered to him. This put Liu Bei in a bad spot and in desperate need of allies. He sought an alliance with Sun Quan, sending Zhuge Liang to make the arrangements. By the time of the battle, Cao Cao claimed to host 800,000 men. Meanwhile, the combined forces of Liu Bei and Sun Quan were a mere 50,000.
But that didn't stop them from putting up a fight. Zhuge Liang and Sun Quan's main strategist Zhou Yu worked together to plan out how they would stop Cao Cao. However, Zhou Yu detested Zhuge Liang and saw him as a threat. As such, a rivalry grew between the two of them, where Zhou Yu would continually use underhanded tactics to try and get Zhuge Liang killed. However, no matter what he tried, Zhuge Liang would always outsmart him. In the end, though, the pair had both realized that the best way to defeat Cao Cao would be through fire.
It's important to note that while Zhuge Liang is painted in the novel with more credit due to the bias toward the Shu side, actually thinking through what's being described shows that while Zhuge Liang does for sure deserve credit, most of the plan was Zhou Yu's, and Zhuge Liang merely improved upon it.
Yes, the plan involved creating a fake beef between Zhou Yu and Huang Gai, an old veteran and one of Sun Quan's most important generals, by having him flogged severely after a heated quarrel. Huang Gai would then write a letter to Cao Cao saying that he plans to defect and will bring over a portion of Sun Quan's fleet. But the ships Huang Gai brought were filled to the brim with oil, explosives, and all sorts of flammables, and he rammed the boats straight into Cao Cao's fleet. In almost an instant, the tide of the battle turned. One of the largest fleets in history was up in flames.
A few key factors made it all the more devastating. First of all, Cao Cao's men were exhausted, not having time to recover from previous campaigns, and they were inexperienced when it came to naval battles. In fact, the naval commander was not the best man for the job, but for certain political reasons, Cao Cao had to choose someone unqualified. As a result, the soldiers were suffering from massive amounts of seasickness, and they needed a remedy. But that remedy was perhaps the worst possible thing.
Peng Tong, an old friend of Zhuge Liang's, deceitfully joined the forces of Cao Cao and pitched him a certain idea that, while it would help with the seasickness, would make a fire attack worse. He advised that Cao Cao chained all the ships of his fleet together to lessen the rocking.
This chain meant that the ships were unable to separate and so could not escape the flames, leading to a near decisive loss. But this didn't spell the end for Cao Cao. With what men he had left, he retreated on land, but the constant arrival of soldiers from Liu Bei's forces meant that while Cao Cao wasn't completely wiped off the board by any means, he had to change his entire course of plans, leaving Liu Bei and Sun Quan to focus on internal political strife.
Now, as mentioned, this is the Romance of the Three Kingdoms account of things. But for those interested in the truth, The rivalry between Zhuge Liang and Zhou Yu is entirely fictional. Zhuge Liang wasn't actually that key of a player in terms of forming the strategies. He only really secured the alliance between Liu Bei and Sun Quan. But since Romance of the Three Kingdoms is very much biased towards Liu Bei's side of things, it makes sure to give their men as much credit as possible, especially Zhuge Liang, who the book treats like a god.
Also, while Cao Cao did claim to have 800,000 men, Zhou Yu reported that he only had roughly 230,000.
It's funny saying only when there's so much more than even the biggest armies of Westeros.
Yes, but that number in itself was greatly inflated due to including non-combatants. But of course, it makes Liu Bei look a lot more impressive when he and Sun Quan are against a force 16 times their size.
Also, in reality, while the fire attack did a lot of damage, it was not exactly the deciding factor it tends to be portrayed as. Not only were Cao Cao's men suffering from a plague, many had recently joined him and were of questionable loyalty.
Which is particularly interesting since many Game of Thrones fans tend to look at the wildfire attack as the decisive factor in the battle, which it really isn't.
The Lannisters literally destroyed their own fleet, which definitely didn't bite them on the ass later. Anyways, let's talk Blackwater. In the year 299 AC, the Battle of Blackwater Bay was fought between Stannis Baratheon and the combined forces of the Lannisters and Tyrells. By this point, Stannis had established himself as the most powerful man in Westeros. He had just defeated who was previously the most powerful man, Renly Baratheon, a rival claimant who was Stannis' brother. Despite being massively outnumbered, Stannis managed to defeat Renly through black magic that allowed him to kill Renly, swiftly ending the battle. In the process, many of Renly's men switched allegiances to Stannis.
Stannis wanted to claim Storm's End, which was held by Sir Courtenay Penrose.
Luckily, if by luckily I mean having a fire witch summon a shadow baby to kill him, Courtenay Penrose would soon die and Storm's End was promptly surrendered to Stannis.
This put the Lannisters in a bad spot and in desperate need of allies. Tyrion sought an alliance with the Tyrells, sending Littlefinger to make the arrangements. But Stannis was fast approaching King's Landing. It seemed more and more likely that Tyrion would have only the City Watch to defend against Stannis' entire army.
But that didn't stop him from putting up a fight. He was forced to work with the Queen and his sister, Cersei. However, Cersei detested Tyrion and saw him as a threat. As such, a rivalry grew between the two of them, where Cersei would continually use underhanded tactics to try and get Tyrion killed. However, no matter what she tried, Tyrion would always outsmart her. In the end, the pair had both realized that the best way to defeat Stannis would be through wildfire.
It's important to note that while most readers tend to give Tyrion all the credit, and that while he's definitely deserving of some, all he really did was rework Cersei's plan to actually make it viable.
Yes, but Cersei's plan was to drop wildfire from above, almost assuredly destroying the whole city. Tyrion shifted it onto the water, having boats leak wildfire into the bay. And then once it got close to Stannis' fleet, an arrow would light it, burning down most of the fleet. In almost an instant, the tide of the battle turned.
A few key factors made it all the more devastating. First of all, Stannis' men were exhausted from not really having time to recover from previous battles, or had very recently joined his forces, meaning that they were of questionable loyalty. In fact, the naval commander was not the best man for the job, but for certain political reasons, Stannis had to choose someone unqualified. As a result, the commander ignored the advice of those who knew what they were doing, leading the whole fleet into the wildfire, hook, line, and sinker.
But that's not all. Throughout the book, Tyrion had slowly been constructing a giant chain, and he used that chain to trap Stannis' entire fleet in the burning bay, so they could not escape the flames.
It wasn't over for Stannis, though. He still had an army on land, and while they held up for a while, the reinforcements of the Lannister-Tyrell alliance made this a decisive loss for Stannis. And while he wasn't completely wiped off the board by any means, he had to change his entire course of plans, leaving the Lannisters to focus on internal political strife.
So yeah, as you can see, both were big naval battles involving one army with a much larger force. However, through a fire attack that completely devastated the opposing fleet, specifically through the use of a chain, the underdogs managed to win. George is a big history nerd, so does that mean that he was heavily inspired by this defining battle of the Three Kingdoms period?
Well, it's possible, if a bit unlikely. George is for the most part inspired by European history. Sure, there's definitely elements of cultures from other continents, especially in Essos, but that doesn't necessarily mean Gurm's familiar with the battle or even the Three Kingdoms period.
But he is. George has talked about being obsessed with the Romance of the Three Kingdoms video game for a little while.
But in all likelihood, this refers to an 80s game, and it's not like you could really learn all of those details in the version he would have been obsessed with. He hasn't made any comments on the Three Kingdoms period that were outside the context of the game, and it seems most likely that other than having knowledge of its existence, he is probably unaware of all the details.
But there's no real way of knowing for sure unless someone asks him.
So I guess if one of you sees him, be sure to ask.
Oh, and also ask him if he got the name River Run from the opening line of Finnegan's Wake.
Alex, shut up.
All right, well, thank you for watching. This isn't our usual type of video, but if you liked it, let us know and we'll do more of these videos occasionally.
Although you can expect the next one in like May or something. This took us forever.
Well, only if you include the procrastination. Thanks for watching!